If you don't know me, my name is Emily, and I have the privilege of bringing to you the third in a series about life hacks from the book of Proverbs. If you missed the first 2 weeks, you can catch them on our YouTube channel or anywhere where you find your podcasts. And I especially encourage you, if you missed Edwina's week, which was the first week, to go back and have a look at that. Because not only was it fantastic, because Ed's fantastic, but she looked at the genre of wisdom literature in the Old Testament. And it gave a little bit of context to Proverbs and how Proverbs should be read. And so it kind of is a really good foundation for the whole series. So if you missed that, I encourage you to go back and have a listen. So we're looking at life hacks from the book of Proverbs. If we are to look at life hacks generally are about making ourselves more productive, more effective. Troy talked about that a little bit last week. It's about how do I make the most of my 24 hours? How do I make sure that in my every week I get done the things that I need to get done? And maybe you've adopted some of these life hacks in your life. I know for me, I heard many years ago someone say they get a lot of reading done because when they go to a doctor's office or they're going waiting for a train or waiting for someone at a coffee, they'll take a book with them. And they spend all that in between time instead of just sitting around or on their phone. They'll spend that time reading. And so now I do that. I also, in the last couple of years, have discovered I really struggled to remember to do my dishes. They would just pile up and it would be really frustrating. And I'd have to do all these dishes all at once. It would never fit in the dishwasher altogether. And so I adopted a life hack that when I finished work, that was my reminder to go and do the dishes. So every day when I finished work, I would spend 10 to 15 minutes stacking the dishwasher, putting the dishes away, whatever, hand washing dishes. Now I only work 4 days a week. So the other 3 days of the week, still trying to figure that one out. But these kinds of life hacks, they're about everyday tasks. They're about our productivity. The hacks that we find in the book of Proverbs are more about living life well. The introduction to Proverbs tells us, and I don't have a slide for this, I apologize, but I'm going to read it to you. So in Proverbs chapter 1, verses 2 to 4, it says this: "The Proverbs are for gaining wisdom and instruction, for understanding words of insight, for receiving instruction in prudent behavior, doing what is right and just and fair, for giving prudence to those who are simple, knowledge and discretion to the young." They're life hacks for living life well. They're about wisdom and instruction and how do we go about doing this business of life? And the reality is that the Proverbs are clues for us not to be more productive, but to be more like Jesus. There's no direct reference to Jesus in the book of Proverbs because the book of Proverbs, believe it or not, was written before Jesus. It does appear in the Old Testament for those of us who might not know. So that is the portion before Jesus came. And they are instructions for us on how to live godly lives that are pleasing to God. As believers, we are called to become like Christ, to live with the same godly character that Christ lived with. And Proverbs gives us clues as to how to do that, with the context of what Edwina talked about in the first week. Before I tell you about my life hack for tonight, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to close your eyes, or if you don't want to close your eyes, that's fine too. But I want you to think of a time in your life where you said something in anger. And think about how that turned out. Or maybe think about a time where someone said something in anger to you and how that turned out. If you are thinking of a real scenario right now, then you already know the wisdom of this proverb. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. We know this truth, right? When we're driving along the road and someone cuts us off, they're a bit inconsiderate towards us, there's an anger that rises up in us. If someone says something insensitive to you, there's an anger that rises up. It's really easy to snap at someone who is inconsiderate or rude or snappy at you, especially if I'm hungry or it's first thing in the morning and I haven't had my tea yet. Sorry, Matt. Now, I want to give a disclaimer. what I'm talking about tonight, the kind of anger that I'm talking about tonight, it's an everyday kind of anger that you would expect to have in our everyday relationships. This is not the kind of wrath that occurs in domestic or workplace abuse situations. I do not think that Proverbs 15:1 is telling people in those scenarios that if you are gentle enough or good enough, then that person will not be angry with you. I do not believe that. So I want to put that out there. And if you are in that situation, I encourage you to reach out to someone and speak to someone. There's services available, hotlines available, or maybe just sometimes speaking to a friend will help, because I know that that's a really difficult situation to be in. But today, I am talking about the kind of conflict you would expect to engage in everyday life. I think that this proverb is a clue to us about how to do conflict well. And I am deeply convinced, in all my 33 years of life, I have seen in the church lots of conflict done badly. I've seen people at high levels and pastors and teams fall apart, and there's a huge fallout, and loads of people get hurt because the conflict that comes up in those teams and in those interpersonal relationships is dealt with badly. I don't think there's any two ways around it. I think that's just a fact. And so I think that if we are to use the Proverbs as ways to live lives more pleasing to God and live lives that are more godly and live lives that are more like Christ, then there's a clue here for us about how to do conflict well. I don't think that the church should have no conflict. The sad reality of life is that, as Wayne said, we are all human. In fact, Paul says this to the church in Ephesus. He says to this church, "Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace." I don't think that's necessary to say to a church that doesn't have conflict. If you guys are all just happy-go-lucky all the time and you love each other, you're not going to say to them, be humble and gentle, be patient, bearing with one another in love. You're not going to be telling those people to make every effort to keep the unity, because there's no effort. We're fine. We don't ever butt heads. We don't ever have disagreements. We don't ever have different views on things. But we know that that's not our reality. And there's something that really strikes me about this passage, which maybe is a little bit of a challenge to some of us, especially if maybe you're thinking about joining a Connect group, but it's really difficult to butt heads with someone or rub shoulders with someone with whom you have no relationship. It's really difficult as a church to bear with one another when we're not living alongside one another. If we don't have deep relationship with one another, we're not going to have any issues. So I don't know you well enough to have any issues with you. And I think as the church, we are called to have that kind of unity. We are called to be in the kind of relationship where we're going to inconvenience one another. We're going to bother one another, and that's a beautiful thing. It's not a bad thing. The challenge is dealing with what comes after, is dealing with the anger that rises up when you feel inconvenienced, when you feel offended. So, the Proverbs gives us the answer to that, right? A gentle word turns away wrath. There you go. We're all done. Time to have some barbecue and go home, yeah? It's a little bit more complicated than that. There is no 12 steps to a gentle word that the Proverbs offers us after. It's not, the Proverbs 15 is not a step-by-step guide. But I, tonight, have written you a comprehensive 12-step guide to how to deal with all of your conflict woes. Yes. You can buy my book afterwards at the back. No. Obviously, I'm joking. Obviously. This could be a whole series in and of itself. And I don't have all that much time with you tonight. We're not going to do a West African church service where I just preach for 6 hours, because I know that you're going to get hungry and tired. But my plan tonight is to offer you some suggestions as to how we might achieve this gentle word that turns away wrath. So, how do we get to the gentle word that turns away wrath, especially when we feel like the person we're speaking to does not deserve it. Because that's inevitably what happens. When we're feeling that feeling, there's this sense of justice in us and a sense of rightness. And why else would you feel the way you're feeling? Otherwise, you would feel guilty, right? You wouldn't feel angry. So here's how I think we can begin to get to that gentle word that turns away wrath. We need to prepare. You cannot simply decide to be godly. There is no switch that you can flip and decide, now I will be gentle in the face of all wrath that comes my way. If you have tried this, you know it is not that simple. I'm sure many of you have heard similar sermons to this tonight, and many of you have been challenged in your life that you need to be gentle with people and you need to not snap back at people, and it's just not that easy. But if you want to see consistent godliness in your life, you need to prepare your character and equip yourself with the right tools to do conflict well. So, I don't have 12, but I have 3 suggestions, 3 tools that might help you when you come up in the face of wrath. And this wrath is sometimes the wrath of others and sometimes the wrath in us. So my first tip is eat, drink, and sleep. Oh, that's so nice to hear a little rumble of, yeah. The Genesis story, that sounds a little bit out of pocket. The Genesis story, when God creates Adam, he creates him to be a steward of creation. He makes Adam to look after the world. And so we read from that as theologians, as Christians who read the Bible, we read from that as people, we are to be stewards of creation. And you are a part of creation. You need to look after your body. You exist in a body. You experience the world through your body. And sometimes the state of your body will impact the emotions that come out of it. For example, when I'm very hungry and I'm feeling irritable, that's not the moment for me to have a difficult conversation. Get some food in me, we'll talk later. So we see some examples of this from Jesus' life. Because Jesus was fully God and fully man. In Mark and Matthew, there's a story of Jesus calming the storm. But before Jesus calms the storm, he's having a nap in the back of the boat because he's tired. All through the Gospels, we hear stories about Jesus eating. He's constantly having meals with people. There's supposed to be another verse up there. So in Matthew 6, Jesus talks about not worrying about food because your Father will take care of you. And then in Matthew 14, he puts his money where his mouth is and he feeds the 5,000 with five fish and 2 loaves. Fish and loaves. I don't remember how many of them there are. And then in John chapter 4, Jesus is in Samaria. He comes to the well and he sits because he's tired. And then when the Samaritan woman comes out, he asks her for a drink because he's thirsty. It's the heat of the day. So we can see that Jesus took care of his body. He ate, drank, and slept. Of course, Jesus also fasted at times. And Jesus, we know, is not a stranger to conflict. I'm certain that there is no point in Jesus' life where he was hangry and so he snapped at the Pharisees, something or other, you brood of vipers. And Jesus is not always gentle. When it is appropriate, Jesus unapologetically speaks the truth and stands for justice. Probably the most prominent example I can think of that is when Jesus goes into the temple and overturns the money changers' tables because there is an injustice that's happening in the temple of the Lord and Jesus is not okay with that. But that is not an unbridled expression of wrath. Jesus goes and prepares a whip. He does this on purpose. He does not snap at the money changers in the temple, but he's also not gentle with them. So I do want to acknowledge that being gentle is not the only way, always, but that's not what I'm talking about tonight. So Tip number one was take care of your body. Tip number 2 is cultivate curiosity. Take care of your body. I heard someone on the front say, what was number 1? Tip number 2 is cultivate curiosity. We are limited. We are not all-knowing. We do not have the full story. If we are to be gentle in the face of wrath, we need to be curious about ourselves. We need to be curious about others. Now, I'm going to spend a little bit of time here tonight because I have done whole workshops on this concept and the tool that I'm going to show you. I don't have time to go through a whole workshop, but I am going to try and do it justice in explaining the tool that I'm going to show you. So this is the experience cube. Can I get a show of hands for anyone in the room who's heard of the experience cube? Okay, some hands around the corners. This is a tool that was developed by a man named Gervais Bush. And he developed it to help people process and reflect on events that happen. There are lots of tools like this. I'm not coming to you tonight and saying, this one, right here, if you follow this, you will never have a badly managed conflict ever again in your life. That is not what I'm saying. This is one way that we can learn to think differently about things that stir up anger in us. So, I'm going to present to you a scenario, and then we're going to walk through the experience cube. I'm going to unpack it with you. So the scenario is this. You ask a friend for a coffee and a walk. You arrange with a friend, you're going to go meet down at the local cafe and go for a walk. You agree to arrive at 9 a.m. You arrive at 9 a.m. You don't hear from your friend until they arrive at 9:20 with a coffee in their hand. Now, I imagine that some of you are already feeling feelings about this and thinking things about this, and maybe you've been in this situation. So let's use the experience cube to process this. You can see that there are 4 quadrants in the experience cube, and they are observations, thoughts, wants, and feelings. I'm actually going to go clockwise, and my slides are not in that order. I'm so sorry, Melissa, but I will let you know when we get to it. So what we're going to do is unpack this scenario based on each of those quadrants. So what are our observations? If we can go to the next slide. Observations are data, measurable facts. So in this scenario, the data is that we agreed on a time to meet. I showed up on time and my friend arrived at 9:20 with a coffee in her hand. At this point, to say that she is late is incorrect, because to say that she is late is actually a thought. The fact is that she arrived at 9:20. Now, if we move on to thoughts, what do I think about this scenario? My friend is late. She didn't let me know that she was going to be late. That's so rude. She's disrespectful of my time. She doesn't want to have coffee with me. Why did she even say yes in the first place? It's really easy in this quadrant to kind of spiral a little bit, and that's okay, because the whole point of this tool is to process. So here we find that there are some clues in my thoughts about how I'm feeling. Now, feelings are things that happen inside of our bodies. If there's no sensation that kind of correlates with your feeling, it might not be a feeling. And so you might find that there's a tightness in your chest. You might feel hot. You might feel cold. You might feel things in your extremities. You might feel heavy. You might find that this scenario makes you angry. It might make you sad. It might make you afraid. If you find when you're in this quadrant about your feelings that you are saying, I feel like, or I feel that, you might actually be expressing a thought. Because a thought is logical reasoning, stories, assumptions, judgments. It's not an experience that you have in your body, okay? So at that point, you've jumped back to thought. I feel like, actually, no, I think that, and that's fine. You can jump around. It's a tool to help you process. So, if I feel angry, sad, afraid, that probably is getting to the core of the problem for me in my wants. So wants are my requests, my desires, my needs. I want my friend to want to spend time with me. I want to feel valued. And again, that maybe takes us back to a thought that my friend doesn't value me. The key, the whole point of this tool is to separate our judgments from facts and our feelings from facts. Because our thoughts and our feelings are valid and they're real experiences, but they are not facts. So, I've done the process. I now understand why I'm angry with my friend. I've reflected. I was curious about myself. Now do I get to go and tell my friend all of these things that I've just... Ed's giggling because she knows the answer is no. At this point, this is the gentle word part. Because just because you've been through this process doesn't mean that the anger's gone. You've identified it. And maybe you've identified the source of it. Maybe this process does help you to dissipate the anger. That's fantastic. That's not the point. It's not supposed to take away your anger. It's supposed to help you understand it. So, if then I've been through this process, I've been curious about myself, then I need to be curious about the other. So if I'm going to approach my friend who's standing there with a coffee in her hand, saying, "Why were you late? And do you not care about me?" does not count as being curious. Because these are loaded questions. Those kinds of questions, they have a truth that you've assumed. Or maybe it's not a truth. You've made an assumption in those questions. And they hold a secret accusation. And questions like those are these just kind of padded, angry comments that someone, if I come up to someone and she comes in at 9:20, "Why were you late?" Well, she's probably going to respond in anger at me. That's what we're trying to avoid. So, if we were to offer my friend a curious invitation, something as simple as, "What happened?" It's open-ended. There's no assumptions. Just tell me what happened. And then later, if she kind of gives me something, I'm like, "Okay, well then tell me more." I don't have to ask her anything specific. I don't have to make any judgments about what she's told me. Just tell me more. Just these open-ended questions, this me being curious. So, in this scenario, my friend's rocked up, it's 9:20, I'm grumpy because I've been waiting for 20 minutes. I don't know if she's showing up at all, blah, blah, blah. "Hey, what happened?" "I'm so sorry, I lost track of time. I know that you love coffee, and so I assumed, since you've been sitting here for 20 minutes, that you would have ordered one already, and I didn't want you to have to wait when I got here, so I grabbed a coffee on the way, so when I got here, we could go on our walk." Now, I don't know about you, but if that happened to me, my feelings would immediately shift. Because my friend was thinking of me. And there was information that I didn't have, that if I wasn't curious, I might not have gotten. It doesn't change the fact that I'm angry at my friend because she didn't let me know she was going to be late. So what's the point? If I'm still angry at this point, I've had my engagement with my friend and I'm still angry. What is the point? The point is to not react in a volatile way to something that's already upset you. It is to give yourself space to reflect and to be curious about what's going on for you. The more you practice this, the more natural it will become. This is the preparation point. The more you practice this, the easier it becomes to offer a gentle word in the face of wrath, even if that wrath is your own. You can use the cube on others who are upset. Curious questions like, "What happened? What do you think about that? What feelings did that bring up?" When you first start this, it might feel a bit clunky because it's a skill. It's a skill that you need to practice. The hard part about conflict is that you have no control over how the other person will respond. All we can do is offer a gentle, curious word and allow them the space to respond. When I was younger, I had a conflict with a girl who had been my friend, and we had a falling out. We were in the same church, and I believed in unity, and I believed that we should all be in right relationship with one another. And so I approached her to have a conversation. We had the conversation, and then, things went on, and we were still having issues. And I talked about it with some of my friends, and some of my friends said to me, "She's intimidated by you." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So I went back to her to have another conversation because I believed in unity, and I tried my darndest to be kind and to be gentle. And we never reconciled. I couldn't tell you now, this is a really long time ago for me, I could not tell you now the content of those conversations. I couldn't tell you how I said things to her. Was I good at being curious? Probably not, but I don't know. What I do know is that with the skills that I had at the time, I could not have dealt with that situation any differently. And with the skills that she had at the time, she could not have dealt with that any differently. People and life are complicated, and sometimes be gentler is not enough. And sometimes we think we're being gentle, and the other person doesn't. We can learn tools like the experience cube to cultivate curiosity, but it is not a magic fix. Which brings me to my third and final suggestion. Preparing to be gentle in the face of wrath is to pray and to submit yourself to the Spirit. I did not put this last because I think it's the last thing that we need to do. I want to say that up front. I think that prayer should be our first point of call, and it should be the thing that underlies everything we do. Because we can try our very best and do everything in our human capacity to be godly and to be like Jesus, and we will fall short. We do need to do the work. We do need to make the effort and learn the skills. But it is God who transforms us into the image of his Son. So pray. When you're feeling angry, pray. When you're feeling hurt, pray. When you're feeling confused, pray. How do we know that the prayer is working? We have some hints in the letter to Ephesus that we read before. Do any of these terms seem familiar to any of you? Little hint. Be humble and gentle, patient, bearing with one another through the bond of peace. These are fruits of the Spirit. If we are living our lives subject to the Spirit of God, prayerfully submitting and listening to the corrections of the Spirit, then the fruit of that is love, joy, peace, forbearance, also known as patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, that gentle answer that turns away wrath, also known as humility, and self-control. And against such things there is no law. Because when we live like this, we are living like Jesus. So, in sum, how do we be gentle in the face of wrath? You have to prepare. You have to take care of your body. You are a steward of creation. Look after yourself. You need to be curious about yourself and about others. And at all times, when this is not enough, you need to pray for God to continue to produce fruit in you and to hold us together in the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. When I started, I asked you to think of a circumstance where you had said something in anger or someone said something in anger to you. It might be that that circumstance is something that you are dealing with right now. If that is the case, I want to invite you to bring that situation to God with me now as I pray to finish up. Thank you, Lord, for the wisdom of Proverbs, for the work of the Spirit in our lives. Will you continue to teach us how to live like Jesus and continue to form us in his image? Will you grant us the courage to do conflict well, and may we see the fruit of your Spirit bind us together in unity and peace, despite all of our human shortcomings. Amen.